We will now come to order. We are convened as of 8:30 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Please note that committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will be held remotely via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial meetings of the minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practical on the board's website. During today's meeting, we are also providing communication access real-time translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should send an email to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. A live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. I would now like to call the roll for the committee members. Director Busick.
Here.
Director Davidson.
Here.
Director Geisinger.
Here.
Director Guzman.
Here.
Director Tisdale.
Present.
And I am the chair, Peggy Catlin. I'm here. All committee members are present. And then, oops, Director Rosenthal, I forgot you, but I see you. Thank you. So you are present as well. And then I also see for the record that we are joined by Director Lewis. So we have all committee members present, and I thank you all for accommodating your schedules. I would like to open public comment to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. During this time, the committee will not offer any direct comments or responses. However, if you would like to be contacted regarding the public comment, please email the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Mr. Kroll, are there any hands raised for public comments?
Committee Chair Catlin, at this time, there is no one present who has raised their hand in indication that they desire to provide public comment.
Is okay, thank you. Were there any email comments received for today's meeting?
Committee Chair Catlin, no, you did not receive any emails in advance of this meeting.
Okay, then. Seeing no public comment and no participants in the queue, we will close the public comment period at this time. There's only one discussion item on our agenda today, and I think that's it's one that we've all been waiting for, and that is the 2024 employee survey results and data evaluation. General Manager and CEO Deborah Johnson and John McKay, Executive Business Partner, would you present this item to the committee, please?
Thank you very much, Committee Chair Catlin. Good morning to all those who are assembled. I'm Deborah Johnson. I'm the General Manager and CEO, and as indicated by the Committee Chair's comments, Mr. McKay and I are here before you to present the 2024 employee survey results and data evaluation. As you may recall from previous conversations relative to our board adopted strategic plan, there are 4 strategic priorities. The strategic priorities consist of community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success. Recognizing that we all are a part of a dynamic organization that's very much labor intensive, we will be for naught without the contributions of individuals that comprise the agency. In doing so, it's critically important for us that we garner an understanding of our colleagues' perceptions, opinions, and attitudes as it relates to the organization as a whole, being the Regional Transportation District. With that being said, during the latest bid shift, or I could say work selection process with frontline employees that are represented, we intentionally garnered the opinions, perceptions, and attitudes of those that comprise the agency during this period of time to optimize the survey data that we could collect. At this juncture, I will yield the floor to Mr. McKay, who has been shepherding this effort on behalf of the agency with individuals within his work unit being our performance analyst. I'm really excited to have him provide you with this information because it really gives a look into what we have been doing collectively as contributors to this agency to ensure that we are optimizing our talent and creating a work environment where individuals can thrive. With that, Mr. McKay, I will yield the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As noted, I am John McKay, Executive Business Partner. Just a quick screen check if someone could confirm that it is displaying.
It is. Thank you.
Very much. As introduced, also, this is the employee survey for 2024. This is the third such survey that is associated with our current strategic plan for 21 through 2026. And I will give a brief outline of the presentation. First, the introduction will go over the nuts and bolts of the survey itself, the survey administration, participation rate, that sort of thing. We'll go into the employee net promoter score, which is the measure associated with the employee ownership strategic priority in the success outcomes of the strategic plan. We will go over a composite index score, which is a different measure of employee satisfaction and engagement. We'll talk about employee favorability, the responses to the survey itself, and then areas of largest improvement, also strategic initiatives and how those have affected the scores or the results rather, and then some key takeaways from the survey. Not without bearing the lead, the key takeaways, and I'll discuss these again at the end. We have seen increased favorability in responses in many areas, actually in all areas across the entire survey. The composite index score, as I mentioned before, is the success outcome. The employee net promoter score is something that is used in certain transit agencies across the country, and staff is assessing whether this is the correct measure as opposed to the employee net promoter, or sorry, the index score as opposed to the net promoter score. The key driver analysis will show that there are a few areas of opportunity that staff can really focus on in order to increase employee engagement and satisfaction. And finally, there is a trend among employees related to their tenure within the agency as to how they respond to the survey itself.
John, if I might interrupt, I don't know if board members would like to, or committee members would like to ask questions as you go along, or if you would prefer to go through the whole presentation.
If I could go through the whole presentation, if folks could potentially just write down the slide number that they'd be interested in doing more of a deep dive in, that'd be great.
That sounds good. Just wanted to do the groundwork. Okay, thank you.
So moving forward, survey administration, this was conducted in April through May. So from April 15th through May 3rd, 2024, which as GM CEO Johnson noted, this aligned with the May work selection period for frontline employees. There were 19 in-person events to bolster that participation in the survey at 9 different facilities. And the survey was offered in several different formats. During the events, the staff had a tablet with them in order to hand off to folks to take the survey, or it was available in printed form if they wanted. It was available to all employees via SurveyMonkey online, and then printed copies were made available at all operations and maintenance facilities across the entire service district. The survey structure, there were 5 job-related questions that we won't get into in depth here today. The likeliness of recommendation to friends and family, that is the employee net promoter score, and that's on a scale of 0 through 10. For anyone familiar with net promoter score, this is scores 0 through 6 are associated with detractors. 7 and 8 are people who are sort of neutral on the survey, on the responses, and then 9 and 10 are your promoters, and we'll get into that more in a moment. There are several related to the Likert scale of very satisfied through very dissatisfied. 17 favorability questions and 3 related to retention, which we'll get into in a moment. And then there was 1 open-ended question. The response rate for 2024 is in line with what we saw in 2022, which we thought was a good survey response rate in 2022. There were 930 surveys submitted that year. This year, there were 1,056 because of the increase in staff out of a total of 2,958 employees. Last year's response rate of 47% was something of an anomaly. It was a huge output. And I was impressed that year. I don't know that we should anticipate seeing something like that regularly in the future. And on this slide, you'll also see some of the other factors that were associated with the survey that was given in that particular year. Moving forward, as for participation by department or division, as you'll see, bus operations and rail operations, they account for the overall more than half of the survey responses. And you'll note that the administration department is represented here under the red wedge. at 12%. This was the survey, the questions were asked as though the administration department were still in its form as it existed in January of 2024. The administration department has been dissolved in its current form, and the functions have been placed in certain areas within the agency. So the question was associated with the individuals who were within the administration department as it existed at the time of the beginning of the year. So onto the Net Promoter Score for employees. As you'll see, the Net Promoter Score went from -1 to -2, so not that much of a drop. But as I noted, the 0 through 6, the respondents who gave a 0 through 6 on this score, these are your detractors. The 7s and 8s are passives, and the 9s and 10s are promoters. And so the formula of the Net Promoter Score equals a percentage of promoters minus a percentage of detractors. And so we've come up with a -2 for this year. And this is, as I noted, a measure that is used in the private sector specifically to gauge customers' willingness to recommend a product or service. And moving on to the composite index score. This is a score that's made up of the responses to 6 different questions. These are averaged to get this 74% mark. And we've seen a 12% increase from year over year, which is a massive improvement. And let me go to the next slide to go into the questions that feed into this index. So these are the 6, and these will be repeated in a moment when we go over the 17 Likert scale questions. So moving from 83 to 66%. There are increases in each area within the agency. And in some places, we have a 10% increase here, 13 here, and a massive 21% increase in the response to the question, I feel that I am safe from crime in the work environment. And as you'll see in a moment, this 66% figure here is the lowest favorability response in the entire survey, but moving from 45% to 66%, we are still, 2/3 of employees within the agency do believe that they are free from crime in the work environment, which is a significant improvement. Moving to the next, this is the employee ownership by tenure. As you'll see, we've had a 15% improvement for individuals in the first year of employment. That drops down to 74% in years 1 through 3. And then over time, this sort of evens out and then eventually increases to 10 or more to 72%. And even in that category, in the 5 to 10 year category, we've moved from 58% up to 70 and 72% respectively. There is a small dip here in the middle in the 3 to 5 year category. This is the height of the COVID year. So the employees who started employment with the agency during COVID or just before have a slightly lower favorability in general. And employee favorability, these are the 17 questions related to employee favorability. These are on a scale of very satisfied to very dissatisfied. And again, across the board, these are in ranked order, going downwards. So starting at the top, 88% of people feel that their supervisor treats them with respect. I won't read each of these, but I will scroll through them quickly if anyone wants to read. And moving on to the next. And again, these are in the mid to high 70s. These are very impressive scores. And again, and one more. And as I mentioned, 66% is the lowest among all of the responses, but it's still high. And again, by tenure, we're seeing the exact sort of swoop that I mentioned before. Starts off high at 89% in the first year, dips down to 76%. The COVID year employees are at 70% as overall favorability, and then increasing in years 5 through retirement, essentially. As I noted before, the largest area of improvement is in the response to the question, I feel that I'm safe from crime in the work environment, massive 21% improvement, which I think is fantastic. As far as supervisors versus non-supervisors, not much of a difference here, but non-represented employees have a significant shift from 56% to 77%. And then represented frontline employees have seen a 16% increase, which is also very encouraging. And this is the second highest increase year over year in the area of employees who feel supported and have opportunities for professional development. Again, not much difference between supervisors and non-supervisors, and sort of the same trend in represented versus non-represented employees, and significant increases in each area. And then each of these, for some reason or other, had an increase of 15% year over year. I understand RTD's mission and vision. I feel my perspective is invited and valued, even if it differs from that of my supervisor or leadership. I am adequately informed about agency news, projects, and initiatives, and I am provided the tools I need to grow my career. So moving on to the strategic initiatives of Back to Basics, People Power, and Welcoming Transit Environment, these all relate to the strategic priorities that are in the strategic plan. These were developed in order to increase or to bolster some of those the strategic priorities and the success outcomes associated therewith. We can see that first, under Back to Basics, under the category of internal communication, we've seen a 15% increase year over year. Again, sort of the same trends, the supervisors and non-supervisors, virtually the same, represented employees and non-represented employees, non-represented being much higher at 79%. But again, we've seen that due to the initiatives related to the Back to Basics strategic initiative, we've seen a 15% increase year over year. Moving to People Power with respect to employee retention. It says here 83% of people feel that they will be working for RTD a year from now. And this is the first year that this question has been asked. So I'm interested in seeing the trends year over year, but 83% to me sounds like a pretty good number, and an additional 7% aren't sure. So only 10% of people do not believe that they'll be with RTD within the calendar year. And one of the questions related to the items that would make a person want to stay in their job. And you can see the top three responses were fair compensation, desirable hours or schedule, and manageable workloads. And these massively outweigh all of the other factors here. These play into the next slide with respect to key drivers. And the key drivers are something that I'm interested in taking a deeper dive in year over year. This is the first year that we've done this calculation for the employee survey results. We've done the same for the community and customer survey results, and those are available on the website. As you'll see here, the areas of opportunity, specifically professional development opportunities and opportunities for advancement. Let me take a moment to talk about the chart itself. So the items that are farther to the left are of lower importance, and the ones that are lower down in the scale are lower satisfaction. So the higher you go and the farther to the right you go, these things matter the most, and these things score higher than those over here. So we can see that fair compensation is leading the way in terms of importance among employees, and the highest response for satisfaction is within the area of agency values. People identify with the agency values, which is fantastic. So we see that if we were to put more resources in these areas of opportunity, and that includes the ones that are right on the line here, B and A as well, it would follow that if efforts were made to bolster those items, that we would see increased employee satisfaction and engagement. And then last to the employee security with respect to Welcoming Transit Environment Strategic Initiative. This was, again, the largest increase year over year of 21%. We can see that some of the agency efforts to improve security, personal security, and the feeling of being safe from crime in the work environment has increased 21% year over year. Again, this is a fantastic result. Same trends here. We see that supervisors and non-supervisors are fairly close. And again, non-represented employees at 77% are fairly high, represented employees at 51%. And touching on this just for a moment, the represented employees, the frontline employees, are out in the field. They are not in a traditional work environment, in an office environment. So they are interacting with individuals in the public on the street. And so they're more likely to feel like they may be subject to crime in the work environment. And again, back to the key takeaways, as we've seen that there is increased favorability across the board. We have seen that the composite index score is more representative of that increase than is the employee net promoter score. And so staff is assessing whether this employee net promoter score is the actual best measure of employee satisfaction and engagement across the agency. As I was sharing with Director Catlin before the meeting started, I attended a conference last week that was did a deep dive into transit agency performance measures, and the folks who organized the conference also have used employee net promoter score within other agencies in the past, or they've recommended that as a good measure. They have since stopped recommending employee net promoter score as a measure. So we have the opportunity to take a look at that and see whether the composite index score or some other measure might be the better indicator for employee ownership overall. As we've seen the key driver analysis, there are areas of opportunity. There are places where we can put efforts to increase employee engagement and satisfaction. And as we've seen, there is favorability pattern by tenure, that those folks who have been with the agency the shortest amount of time are more likely to respond that they give a favorable rating. There's a slight decrease over time, but then there's an increase as individuals stay with the agency longer. So that shows that we should put efforts into keeping folks around longer. And with that, I will conclude the presentation. I'll keep it up so that I can answer specific questions to any of the slides, but I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. McKay, and thank you, Ms. Johnson. I also noted that our Chief People Officer, Charlene Pelleggi, is here if she wanted to add any context to that. At this time, I'd like to open it up to directors who might have any questions or comments. Director Busick, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a quick comment. Really good to see the dramatic increase in the index score. As I've said a million times before, I'm not a fan of that net promoter score concept, period. So index score, I think it gives you more accurate reflection of what's going on. With regard to the safety issue, represented employees, I know we're taking steps constantly to work on that. And I hope we just continue to really push hard on making them feel safer. Thanks so much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Director Busick. Chair Davidson, please.
Thank you, Committee Chair Catlin. Thanks for the presentation, Mr. McKay. I really appreciate it. And Ms. Johnson and Ms. Pelleggi, thank you for the work that's moving us in a good direction here with some of the results on the surveys. I have two questions. The first is on slide 15, packet page 21. This is where we were looking at that swoop, I think you called it, Mr. McKay. I'm curious whether that has any correlation at all to what we see in retention. In other words, I know we talked a lot about our goals around folks who join the agency and then having pretty immediate, challenges with retention. But I'm curious, is around the 3 to 5 year mark in typical years where we're seeing more churn. And then as folks stay, there are folks that are generally more satisfied with the agency, or does this not correlate at all with any kind of churn or retention?
If I may, Committee Chair Catlin, I'll start and then yield the floor to my colleagues.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very kindly, and thank you, Chair Davidson, for the question. So prior to yielding the floor, I want to provide context. Typically, as one looks at information relative to a transit agency, this seems to be par for the course. Recognizing that in an industry such as ours, coming into the agency, especially when you're a represented employee, you do not have the opportunity to select optimal work shifts that may work for your lifestyle. And I say that because it's based on seniority. When we do train employees, it's typically happening during the course of a business day, not working on an owl shift, which typically an owl shift could be categorized commencing at 9 o'clock at night. So individuals are coming into the organization, they may have mentors and things of the like. And while it may be challenging in that 1 to 3 year time period, eventually they build up seniority and they have an opportunity to bid on different shifts as they go forward. So I believe, and I said, this is my assessment relative to my experience in this industry, that it is indicative of working in the transit agency since this profession has transcended somewhat. And then more specifically, we have leveraged different support mechanisms, and Ms. Pelleggi could speak to that, relative to providing individuals with stay interviews so we can garner an understanding during those pivotal times in which they're really becoming acclimated to their work environment. So with that, Ms. Pelleggi, would you like to add any additional context relative to what I've stated?
Ms. Pelleggi?
So can you hear me now?
Yes.
So Charlene Pelleggi, Chief People Officer. I would reinforce what GM Johnson has communicated, certainly with our represented employees who have variations in their schedules. I would also state that this is a point in time, so this is a great metric for us. And with the Employee and Labor Relations Department, we're actually looking at, we do stay interviews in the first 90 to 100 days, but we're actually looking and exploring at trying to do a stay interview or a pulse, if you will, on an anniversary date. So trying to catch more individuals as they're further along. So that would give us additional data points at years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I don't want to say much more than that because this is one data point, but it's pointing to additional areas of focus that we want to look into so that we can explore. And as well, the difference between represented and non-represented. We still need to look into that and see what may be impacting that score as well.
Thank you, Ms. Pelleggi. Chair Davidson, did that answer your question?
It did, Committee Chair Catlin. Thank you very much. And very interesting and cool to hear about the state interviews. Committee Chair, I'll hold my second question for the rest of the directors and go to the back of the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. Director Guzman, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two quick questions, I hope. How are we communicating? I'm looking at packet page 34, slide 28, the difference between the represented and non-represented folks. And so how are we communicating differently to ensure that our represented folks get the same message with the same frequency? And I ask that because it's always quite a bit easier to do it when you're on a computer, when you're getting emails, when you're in an office setting where you have maybe some, water cooler opportunities. But when you're out driving a bus or operating a train or doing maintenance of way work, you might have a more limited capacity. And having been a union member before, when you got to get the work done, there's no time to chit chat. You got to put hands to work. So I'm just curious about how we're maybe contemplating communicating better with our represented folks. Anybody want to speak to that?
If
Ms.
I may.
Johnson? Yes, please, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Committee Chair Catlin, and thank you, Secretary Guzman, for your question. So recognizing for all intents and purposes, the transit agencies just across the board, the vast majority of their employees constitute represented employees typically. And so with that as a backdrop, there are different mechanisms in reference to leveraging communicate to those audiences, to the point that you raised, recognizing that perhaps they're not information is not readily accessible because they're not sitting at a desk. In some agencies in which I work, some individuals don't even have email addresses. So we're being intentional, leveraging quite naturally a myriad of different avenues. We have what we call our employee ownership task force. That's intentionally comprised of represented employees with a cross-section of non-represented employees. We want to be able to ensure that our represented colleagues have a voice and that their voice will be heard. So we leverage them in reference to this information, and they're getting this feedback directly in reference to Mr. McKay and his staff relative to what's happening. More specifically within the divisions, we have our displays where we give information and we roll that out specifically and garner an understanding about how best they would like to receive information. Thirdly, there's a form of bulletins in which we provide to frontline employees in some instances where they have to sign for them, so we know they receive them. And also we leverage their supervisors going forward to disseminate information across the board. And then fourthly, but certainly not least, contingent upon the message, we will actually email information directly to their homes on record as well. As relates to providing information, I can tell you that I hear from frontline employees. That's why in turn, I have set up an email box specifically for inquiries. And then we do have boxes throughout the organization, drop boxes whereby information can be placed. And Ms. Pelleggi and shepherding that as we go forward, because we want to ensure that we're circling back and providing a loop. And then more specifically, we are asking the question, recognizing that it's not going to be a cookie cutter approach, what might work best for them. So I'm going to yield the floor to John McKay so we can speak more directly about the EOTF, the Employee Ownership Task Force, and then Ms. Pileggi as well, because we do have different mechanisms for different modalities, recognizing that we have to ensure that we're providing information in the manner that our colleagues would like to receive it. Thank you.
So I see nods from Director Guzman. And before I yield the floor to Mr. McKay and Ms. Pileggi, did that satisfy your question, Director Guzman?
Yeah, I work an hourly job at a major corporation, and getting information from the top down is often difficult. And so there's a compromise, right? Which is I have to do my part, which is read what I'm given and ensure that I understand it. But then there's also a real need to make sure that that information is readily available. You know, I don't sit at a desk. I'm standing behind a Mastrena machine pulling espresso shots most of my day and talking to customers. And so in the same way, I can envision that might impact how our represented employees through the ATU are potentially not able to, in the moment, get information, but have to follow up and do a bit of extra work. And so the concern there is it's such a vast difference. I mean, there's a 20-point difference between, you know, how they're agreeing and strongly agreeing with getting this information. It's good to see the improvement. It was just a curious question that I had, because I understand coming from a union position going forward.
If I may, I forgot something that's critically important. On a weekly basis, we disseminate Inside Connections, which is our weekly newsletter. And we're intentional where we ensure that we're providing an avenue where individuals can submit stories. And I have to tell you, through data analytics that we look at on a weekly basis, one of the areas in which our colleagues enjoy receiving information is about what other people are doing within the organization as a whole. And that's critically important. And the other component that I failed to mention is that on a bi-monthly basis, I go along with my colleagues to different divisions at different times of the day and have what I call dialogues with Deborah. And basically it gives opportunity for our colleagues to ask questions of me. They can submit those in advance. And then more specifically as well, I've been known to pop up at a division at 10 o'clock at night, and it's not a gotcha. It's to the point that Secretary Guzman raised. So I can see people in their work environment when they are there. And basically going to Denver Union Station on a Friday night, I'll be in the bus box at midnight. So all of those things are critically important, recognizing that they don't have the traditional work hours and we are a labor intensive organization. So I just wanted to acknowledge Secretary Guzman's comments, because it is critically important that we are communicating in a way in which people want to receive information. And quite naturally, there's two different messages as we talk about I'm safe from a crime in the workplace, recognizing the disparity in the results. I'm not sitting in a mobile office in a confined space where I am just exposed to the elements of people, unlike somebody sitting at Civic Center. So we do have to keep that in mind, and recognizing that's why we have these strategic initiatives, leaning into the point that we need help from state legislators in reference to increasing penalties for those that don't respect the work environment in which our colleagues have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Do you think it would be prudent at this point to add Mr. McKay or Ms. Pileggi's perspective?
Madam Chair.
Please.
Thank you. GM CEO Johnson hit on most of the points that I would have covered. I just wanted to add a few other avenues through which these data will be communicated with employees. So the Inside Connections was mentioned. That's the sort of employee newsletter that is emailed every Wednesday. There's also the hot sheet that comes out at the end of each week. This is a brief 2-page sort of highlights of that are distributed to represented employees on a regular basis. And it's really just the highlights. It's front and back, or just maybe one. Sometimes it's one page only, highlighting the very tip top things that need to be known. And that's an avenue through which we could communicate very high level employee survey data. Also, information displays are distributed around the agency. These are for in operating facilities specifically. There is a sort of scrolling display showing information, upcoming events, things like that. This year, we're trying something new. We're preparing a video outlining the results of the survey, and that will be played on a regular basis on these information displays. There are, and again, we're highlighting the key takeaways and the most improved areas of this employee surveys. There's also facts and snacks, which is a sort of a misnomer. We don't provide snacks for these things, but there is a video sort of seminar that is guided by staff, and employees are given the opportunity to ask questions in those. GM CEO Johnson mentioned the dialogue with Deborah, and also highlighted the Employee Opportunity Task Force. This is a group of volunteers from across the agency. These are passionate folks who apply to participate in these task forces that tackle individual. This formulation, they tackle strategic initiatives specifically, or they're assigned to one of 3 teams that addresses each of the strategic initiatives specifically, and they sort of serve as acolytes to share this information with their peers as well. So they're spreading the gospel of the good work that's being done.
Thank you. Ms. Pileggi, would you like to add on?
Just one small item. I would just add that one of the we just recently completed the revamp and launch of the supervisor and managers training, which completed June 30th, actually. And in that, one of those modules is about communication. And why I'm flagging this is because, to your point, Director Guzman, when you are in the field and you're working, you're focused on your in the moment, that job. And we wanted to reinforce to our supervisors and managers that one of your key responsibilities is to ensure that your staff have the information that they need at the time that they need it in order to perform their job. And so that's another piece. So it's multifaceted, I think, is what I'm trying to convey between what GM Johnson said and what Mr. McKay said, is that we're hitting it from multiple levels. And again, we're seeing some improvement, but every time we get a data point, we look at it and then we adjust and keep trying to move that needle further so that represented groups in particular feel they're getting the information they need when they need it.
Thank you, Ms. Pileggi. Director Guzman, you said you had a second question.
Yeah.
If you brief, because I see a number of other directors in the queue.
Yes, sorry, this one's more maybe a comment. I do have a concern on the slide 32, page 38. I think that's the right one. Yes, this one. About the tools and equipment location and the agency culture. I think is that, yeah, J&G, that they're lower importance and lower satisfaction. And I'm curious to engage in a conversation about that, but we can do that another time. I just wanted to flag that those two are kind of outliers in a very weird part of that layout, and it causes me concern that there's any question about not having the right tools or equipment available for employees. And maybe I'm misunderstanding what that J stands for, but that caught my eye. We can't do our job without the right stuff. And so do we have it or not?
Mr. McKay, would you like to respond to that?
That I can't speak specifically to the responses. I'm not sure exactly, like Director Guzman said, I don't know what that means exactly, or what the responses to this mean. That I can't say specifically what tools or equipment folks don't have that they might need to perform their duties, but I can see on this. So these are self-reported, the areas of importance. So these must have ranked fairly low. Let me go back one slide here. So these are 115 responses related to this. So these were ranked order. So fair compensation was vastly more important to employees at 808 responses to 115 here. So this probably affects a smaller portion of the agency. And we'll have to do a deeper dive to understand which tools and which equipment employees don't have, or they feel that it could be improved. And I see CPO Pileggi's hand is up as well, so she may have some additional information.
Ms. Pileggi?
Thank you. Just the key way to look at that chart is it's a driver analysis. And so it's where the rankings are, the intent would be, these are the key things that would really push employee scores in a positive fashion. So it's not to say that they're not important. It's just from a driver analysis, the ability to impact change in a positive momentum, that's the key. So it's not to say they're not important. It's just, if we lost fair compensation, that would have a much more, a greater impact on overall employee satisfaction than the tools. That's really how it's intended to be read from a driver's perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Pelleggi. That clarifies it.
Madam, Chair, can I say one thing?
Sure.
My only concern with that is, and I appreciate the answers, thank you very much. But my only concern of that is if that's a lower importance and lower satisfaction, but there were only 115 responses, were the 115 responses all from the same department? For example, was it all the mechanics or was it all the maintenance of way workers? Because for that particular subgroup within the pie chart that you showed us earlier, may be really top of mind for them. And the results could be skewed because they're going up against folks that are in an administrative role or in an operative role that are very different from what they're looking at. I don't know why that's calling my attention. I want to point that out because that could impact a specific subset of our employees in a way that is maybe being overlooked if we're not careful with the information that we have. Thanks.
And before I go to GM CEO Johnson, I'm going to say John McKay pledged that they wanted to do a deeper dive into this. So I think Director Guzman, you bring up a couple of good points that perhaps would factor into that further analysis. GM CEO Johnson, please.
Yes, thank you very kindly. I was just going to further iterate that I have had the opportunity to read each freestanding comment, and there is a cross section. It's just not represented employees. It's across the board as we talk about tools and equipment. It could be having access to viable training. It could be, maintaining one certification. So there is a cross section. And as we did last year, when we see these things, we have focus groups with certain areas to be able to discern what might be the causal factors relative to that. And to the point that you raised about perhaps like mechanics not having tools, I don't want to delve too deeply, but recognizing that those are represented employees and there are elements provided to them which are bargainable items. I can assure you that we're not in a position whereby somebody doesn't have a tool to do their job because it's for the betterment of the organization. And so if we're hiring some as a mechanic, we don't expect them to bring in certain elements of equipment in which they need. So I just wanted to state that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Okay, moving on, Director Geisinger.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this work and the presentation. It's great to see. Can we go back to slide 15, please? Yeah, thanks. I've been talking with one of our CAC members, Matt Fromer, about, I think in our board documents, it shows our vacancy rate has gone from 11% to 20%. No, our vacancy rate has gone from 20% to 11%. It's gotten a lot better. And I'm sorry. And I think when you were mentioning the numbers, Mr. McKay, you were saying that even though the percentage went down this year, we had more responses. And I'm seeing that the numbers on the composite score for the first year people are really good. These are good numbers everywhere. They've gone up, but they go up a lot more in that first year group. Have you pulled apart how many are in each of these groups and looked at if you took that first year group out, where our numbers would be? And you may not have, but that might be something that would be worth a deeper dive when you go to do that.
Who would like to address that?
If I may just start, just to Committee Chair Catlin and Director Geisinger, thank you for the question. But keeping in mind, we want people to tell us what is actually happening. So relative to these surveys, they are done from a level of anonymity as we go forward. So we will go back, as I said, and have key focus groups as we go forward. I think that's critically important because recognizing with some individuals, there could be some trepidation and angst. So I just wanted to qualify that for all of you going forward as we recognize doing a deeper dive. So it's the willingness of somebody wanting to say whether or not they have spoken to that. But for us, and I can yield the floor to Ms. Pelleggi, recognizing what employees that have been here for less than 1 year, that's why they're doing stay interviews so we can garner a better understanding what is keeping people in the mix here at the organization. So I just wanted to provide that context. Thank you.
Great,
Ms.
thank
Pelleggi? Oh, sorry.
I just to clarify, I'm not talking about individual people or anonymity, just the math of if you took out these less than 1 year people, if we've gone to a better vacancy rate, I assume many of those are less than 1 year and their numbers are a lot higher. How do our numbers look, really compared to the group that we talked to last year? I think it would be, and they look good, but I think it would be an interesting way of looking at people who've been here longer. I'm sorry, Ms. Pelleggi, if she had more.
I would just say, great question. That requires a cross tabulation. I don't believe we've delved that deep to that point, as Mr. McKay has said, that we do need to look at that. It really depends on, of course, if there were of the respondents, if the percentage was heavily weighted to first year of the overall respondents, then yes, then that would have an impact. But if it's not, then it would be negligible. So you are correct. It's really just a math piece, and we can certainly do a deeper dive on that. But as of yet, have not.
Great. And Ms. Pelleggi, I'm given those numbers that appear to have gone from a 20% vacancy down to 11%. I'm looking forward to your presentation on the 16th. I assume you will be going into some of that. That's great. And just one more question. Do we ask similar questions? I think we may do some exit interviews. Do we ask similar questions of people when they're leaving? And does that give us some helpful indication of what people, why they're leaving and how they compare to these sorts of questions?
Ms. Pelleggi?
Yes. So the first thing I'd like to highlight is both the stay interview and the exit interview are they're not mandatory. They depend on individuals wishing to participate. So I flagged that because with exit interviews, we certainly have a higher participation rate, voluntary participation rate with the stay interviews than we do with the exit interviews. So I just want to qualify that because we have a smaller sampling. The questions are, they're related, but I would not say they're the same because really the initial stay, and this is to Chair Davidson's earlier question, is part of why we're looking at doing stay interviews on an annual basis. Because the initial stay interview really is focused on your first 90 to 100 days. And so what was your experience being on while you were being onboarded? How was your training? Do you have the supports you need? Very different questions than someone who's been here for 5 or 7 years, and why have you elected to move on? So that there are some pieces where we could draw a correlation, but I'd say generally speaking, no, I would consider them to be very different.
Thank
Does
you.
that?
That's all I've got. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Geisinger. Director Rosenthal, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sometimes this doesn't work well.
Yes.
Everybody got? Okay. So these are very good numbers, and I really appreciate everybody from the general manager, your entire team, all the employees who really participated in this, and for all of their hard work. It shows great leadership, and that our efforts, your efforts, are certainly yielding good results, and in some cases, excellent, great results. I'm looking at this employee net promoter score. I echo my colleagues. It's not the greatest in terms of even, what it even means, what it actually says. What my question is can we just even modify the formula to not make it the way that is and just make it an average of all of those scores? And would that be informative and helpful?
Well, either John McKay or I see Ms. Johnson's hand is up. I think, go ahead.
Thank you very kindly. So thank you, Director Rosenthal, for the question. And so when you say modify the scores, we would not be altering how we derive a net promoter score, because the whole notion behind it is how many promoters that you have. But with that as the backdrop, as we talk about the satisfaction, as we indicated, or more specifically, Mr. McKay indicated during his presentation, that's why we're doing both of them, recognizing that this board agreed to the Net Promoter Score, and we would not be doing it absence of getting direction from the board collectively. And so that's why we're going forward with the employee ownership composite, because for all intents and purposes, as we clearly see, if an individual has a perception that, okay, it could be better, generally they're passive, meaning that they're not going to say what's wrong. And so basically on a scale whereby you could select a 7, if you had a scale from 1 to 10, a 7 would be viewed as being passive with a Net Promoter Score, but the ownership composite index score is a lot different. So I just wanted to provide that context whereby we would not be making any alterations in absentia of the board. And so at this juncture, we would be bringing forward a recommendation at a suitable time to the board relative to discontinuing usage of the Net Promoter Score. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Director Rosenthal, I think you were saying that rather than having such heavily weighted scores, that being 1 through 6 as being negative, and the neutral scores, and then the net or the promoter scores, that a lot of people tend to score things based on an average rather than understanding the actual math involved in deriving a Net Promoter Score. John, is that, Mr. McKay, am I correct on that? I mean, Director Rosenthal was suggesting more of just an average. Is that right, Director Rosenthal?
Well, then it wouldn't be a
Yeah.
Net Promoter Score, though. That's what
Right.
I'm trying to get to. It would not be a Net
Right.
Promoter Score, so we couldn't qualify as such.
And that's that, and I appreciate those answers. And I'll just move on to my next question. So in terms of the way the survey was conducted, and I appreciate all the outreach, the number of events, the creativity in trying to reach folks. And so in terms of perhaps texting folks and maybe proactively saying, I'll send everybody a text and say, would you like to opt in? If we do not hear from you, then that means you're not opting in, but at least we're reaching out by text. I get a lot of texts from folks trying to raise money. So, and I just, delete them or block them or something, but I'm just sort of suggesting perhaps that might be a methodology to reach more people.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes, so thank you very much for that suggestion, Director Rosenthal, but I think there's a critically important nuanced aspect we have to keep in mind. As a frontline employee, one is not supposed to have their cell phone at the ready. We be it in precarious positions, whether or not if somebody were responding to the text, are we paying for them? Is that eligible work requirement and things of the like? So we do not communicate in that form or fashion with, the vast majority of our employees, which comprise 2/3 of the workforce here. So thank you.
I understand that. Thank you. And then just an observation, I noticed the increase in the number of employees over the past couple years, and that is also admirable. I really appreciate that. One question about the survey length and complexity itself. And I know that I do not like to take long surveys. And then sometimes 1/3 to halfway through it, I just give up and close it. I'm wondering how long and how complex was the survey? And then also letting folks know during the survey, how far along are you? So people know like, oh, I'm getting near the end and that sort of thing.
Madam Chair, I can speak to that.
Please, John, go ahead.
So the survey in paper form was legal size, it was front and back. That was it. So in electronic form, as you're going through, there is a page count on there. But as far as questions, there were 37 individual questions, some of them related to, as GM CEO noted, this is an anonymous survey, but individuals were able to identify their department of origin. That accounted for several questions, just sort of identifying with their work groups so that we can attribute specific responses to certain areas. But 37 questions in all. There was one ranking question, and there was one open-ended question this year. In previous years, in last year's survey, there were 5 open-ended questions, And what we found was that individuals were using each box to sort of reiterate what they had just said. So, and if someone had an axe to grind of sorts, they would sort of say it 5 times over. So there was one open-ended question that is optional. No one has to provide any information, but the entire survey is intended to take between 7 and 10 minutes in total. And there are, as I noted, the 19 different events at 9 different facilities. The employees were there to help people. The folks who are on my team were there engaging with them. Members of the leadership team are also there to encourage participation. And we really did meet people where they were. So, you know, that as I noted, this was done during the work selection period. So on one side of the room, the schedules are up and individuals are able to go and pick their routes that they would like to run, or blocks, or however that's done. And then on the other side of the room, that's where the table was set up for the employee survey. So this is the reason this was done during the work selection period is we know that individuals have to come in during that period. And so there are specific times set up for specific areas. So for commuter rail, their bid is during this specific time, or the frontline operators, they have to be at one of the operating facilities at these times. And so we really know that we are making face-to-face contact to encourage individuals to take the survey.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Does that answer your question, Director Rosenthal?
Most certainly does. And then my last question, and perhaps we can revisit this in operations committee, perhaps, or elsewhere. The 4 strategic priorities. Does the general manager still believe that they are still good, valid, representative of sort of the realms that RTD does, occupies, pursues, et cetera? So should we be adding one, modifying one or more, changing the name? Does she still believe that these are still good representative for our agency?
Ms. Johnson, if you'd like to respond to that, but I would just like to interject that might be a topic for our next board retreat. But
yes, but I would say, recognizing that this board adopted the 4 strategic priorities of community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success, those are most reflective of our transit agency, recognizing that we are interwoven to the fabrics of the communities that we serve. We provide vast value to the community, not only to the region, but to the state and at a national level as a whole, recognizing that we are an economic driver quite naturally for this metropolitan region, and then recognizing financial success. We are all fiduciaries of this transit agency because we have the responsibility of being stewards of taxpayer dollars, and quite naturally, without people comprising the agency, there'd be no need for any of us. And so I do believe those are clear-cut priorities for this organization. And if anything, the strategic initiatives, as we look at the opinions, perceptions, and attitudes that we have been able to garner from this survey, that's how those came to fruition last year. And recognizing the trajectory upon which we are on, I believe we're on the precipice of change. So I wholeheartedly believe that we should be steadfast in our efforts and work with our employees, because when we ask for people's opinions, if we do nothing with them, then it's for naught. And we will clearly see the lack of engagement as we go forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to offer my opinion relative to what I believe is most prudent for the betterment of this organization. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager, and thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions and comments.
thank you, Director Rosenthal. Director Tisdale, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Relative to the employee net promoter score, it is obviously concerning that it went down rather than up, particularly when we see the composite score on the individual measures having strong increase. And as it appears that as a result of that, there's a question, and the board report even says that staff says it's really not a good measure. And then in this presentation, Mr. McKay offers that at a conference he attended with transit agencies, there was questioning as to the validity and worth of the Net Promoter Score, and Director Buzek climbed on that bandwagon as well and indicated that he had concern. Recognizing that it was at the insistence and urging of the prior Performance Committee Chair and with the support of GM CEO that we adopted the Net Promoter Score, I'm very concerned about saying, well, you know, it went down, so we're not sure it's a good measure. Well, maybe that's exactly the first index of a good measure, is that it goes up and down. And I think we need to look at that. More importantly, it has been noted that the Net Promoter Score is used amongst a number of transit agencies, and also, as significantly, it is very widely used in the private sector. And if we are to compensate our general manager CEO based upon the compensation policy that we have, comparing to the private sector, then I would urge extreme caution before we say, well, let's jettison this Net Promoter Score measure. Because if we're going to reward somebody based upon the private sector, then we need to judge them based upon the private sector. So I'm concerned about that. And the other thing, a personal note, there's been reference to the Likert scale. Actually, Rensis Likert created the Likert scale. I knew Rensis Likert. I worked with Rensis Likert at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. And so I had occasion to learn about the Likert scale and how it was developed and how it was utilized. So I just want to point that out for the record so that people will know. The third and final comment that I have is that it is concerning, it's not devastating, but it's concerning that half of our represented employees do not feel safe at work. 49% to be accurate, but that's half of our represented employees who do not feel safe. I think it is incumbent upon us to, and I've heard some comment to this effect, so I'm gilding the lily at this point. It is incumbent upon us to expend extra effort in creating a sense of safety and security, and not just a sense, but also providing the reality. But this, after all, is just a measure of the sense that people have. They feel that they're safe. And I think that we need to address that strongly. So they're not really questions. They're three comments, and I thank you for your patience in my espousing them here. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Tisdale. And I think those are concerning, but I also am very encouraged by the increased score. So with that, all right, Chair Davidson, please.
Thank
Oh,
you,
wait a minute.
Madam Chair.
I see Chief People Officer Pelegi with her hand raised. Would you like to comment on that particular piece?
Yeah, if I may, thank you, Director Tisdale. And I just wanted to add, just for context, having worked in private sector and a Net Promoter Score, in particular in hospitality, where I spent 11 years, is key. That has been for a very long time. One of the things that you would also note, any of us who've completed surveys that are driven for Net Promoter Scores, airlines, hospitality, hotels, they actually, one of the areas, instead of potentially changing, if that was a decision by the board, would be then we have to educate so that people understand that if you are rating a 7 or 8 as a passive, that's fine. You don't want to change their rating, but you want to make sure that people understand, because often individuals will think, I think an 8 is a great score, but from a Net Promoter Score, if it's 9 or 10, that's what it's measuring. And so again, I just wanted to flag that you do see that, and it is part of that process to also help educate all of the employees who would be completing it, which from my perspective, obviously I was not here when the NPS was first rolled out, but I haven't seen the level of, again, I'll say education that you would see in hospitality to help your survey takers understand what it is that you're measuring. That is also an option that's available, and that's pretty standard in the private sector when they use NPS to make sure it's understood. So just wanted to add that context to Director Tisdale's comments, because the private sector does use it.
Thank you, Ms. Pelleggi. That's very helpful. Director Lewis.
I thought Director Davidson was next.
Oh,
No?
I'm sorry. Yes. I think Director Davidson took his hand down and put it back up. So Director, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I think my hand got pulled down. I'll keep it brief because this is related to the NPS discussion and a similar line of thinking, questioning as Director Tisdale. I think on the customer side of things, NPS, it's very valuable, but it's also very lagging of other things that give you an early look at things. On the employee side of things, it would seem to me that, the whole notion of NPS is how likely you are to recommend. And so this would have a measurable impact on our retention and our recruitment. So it's interesting to me that we are seeing a little bit of a decline, and I'm certainly inclined to track this metric over time to see how it moves, especially when we're seeing some things that might lead the way to an increased NPS or moving the right direction right now. But if we're seeing a decline in NPS, it would suggest that you have an increase in detractors on one hand, or possibly just a drop in promoters on the other side. But it's my understanding that we've seen some uptick in our recruitment and retention efforts. So that's where, perhaps we're seeing a little bit of disconnect. But I'm wondering if and it's okay if we don't have a lot of refined thoughts on this right now, but if Ms. Pelleggi or Ms. Johnson or Mr. McKay have any comments around the fact that we are seeing that little dip in NPS, which I'm inclined to continue to measure over time just to see how it's informing us, but then we're having some increase in recruitment and retention. Just wondering if you could comment on what might be driving that seeming disconnect.
Ms. Pelleggi.
Thank you. My response to that is, frankly, Chair Davidson, I would need to actually do more, a deeper dive into the data, because that requires some cross tabulations, and also if you look at even willingness to recommend, there could be a tie between, depending on what group. If you're in an office job and you're feeling 77% safe from crime, you might be more willing to recommend. We recommend people we know, friends, family, or otherwise often. And so when we're thinking of that question, if again, cross-tabulating, looking and at the deeper dive, as Mr. McKay has said, if this is represented staff, if there's a sharper decline, if you would say bus operators, they're feeling less safe at work, they potentially would be less likely to recommend someone they know and care about to come and work in that work environment. So I think there's a couple pieces there that right now I wouldn't have enough data at the ready to say this would be the correlation, but it's certainly something that we would want to look at in that deeper dive.
Thank you, Ms.
Fair
Pelleggi.
enough. Thank you.
That answers the question, Chair Davidson? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Now moving on to Director Lewis.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I'm just, sometimes I don't think we take time out to enjoy some good news, and I think the overall numbers from this survey are very positive. So I think we all need to take a deep breath and enjoy it. I've watched a lot of gymnastics, and sometimes they're told to enjoy the moment because it can be very stressful from going one event to another event, which is very similar to what we do. We go from one emergency to another emergency. So definitely enjoy the numbers. I'm really excited about that. But I have two questions. Was this released to the public before this meeting, this survey?
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, I apologize if I may.
Please.
No, this is not. Our intent behind this was to ensure that we shared this with the board, and quite naturally during the course of this week, we will be sharing this in different forums with employees.
Thank you. For some reason, I thought I heard a reporter quote something from a survey, and I wasn't sure if he was referring to this one or not. So I'm happy that we got to see this before it goes to the public. So we have, we're ready, at the ready to answer questions. The one thing that does stick out to me, and it is concerning, is the representative employee, the drivers, and the word mental health keeps starting to pop up in my mind. I know that the rookies get stuck with the worst routes, and I understand the methodology, but this is something I think we really need to dig in with the CBA. I think we need to bring this up to see if we can come up with some other methodology to spread out the driver assignments, using the fact that we have very low numbers on the safety. I think it was 51%. And also, I couldn't imagine doing the same route over and over again, especially if it was like the 15L going east. That definitely has to start dipping into the realm of mental health issues. I know I would be stressed out. So I know I'm being a little ambiguity there, but I think it's something we need to think about as we go into those negotiations later in the year, and talk with them and see if we can come up with some other strategy. Does anybody have any comments on that? I know there was a comment, but did anybody have any responses to that?
Ms. Johnson, please.
Yes, thank you. And just for a point of clarity, Director Lewis, I believe if you were commenting on a reference that was made earlier in the week relative to some information regarding the work environment, there was organizational design and cultural assessment that was done that I commissioned several months ago, and it seems as if it made its way to the media. And that was the reference there as a point of clarity. Recognizing seniority-based work is critical to collective bargaining units. This has been a conversation of which I've been privy to on a national level, quite naturally recognizing that individuals work hard and seniority is critical to all aspects of representative positions. That may be a difficult element to bargain about. I do want to also clarify, you mentioned, as you indicated, drivers. Those aren't the only representative employees that we have at the organization. So oftentimes we're quick to look at the operators to say this is what's happening, but also you have to think about those that may be mechanics that are out swapping out a vehicle at odd times of the night as well. So I just wanted to state that for the record. As we go forward, that there's a myriad of different positions that also have owl service. And then I'll round out by saying, interestingly enough, that individuals have an opportunity to pick their work shifts, and you'd be surprised that there are individuals, and I know one operator in particular that has bid on the 15 and does have 11 years of seniority, and some individuals do enjoy those routes. So it's important to note that there's always a specific route or a line or a division or a work shift that may be conducive for one's own personal lifestyle. And so I just want to ensure that we have that understanding going forward, that people that are working an owl shift, it may not be detrimental, but it is critically important, and your comment hasn't fallen upon deaf ears relative to ensuring that there is a mechanism. So there are exploration aspects on a more national level, recognizing the whole premise behind shift work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And Director Lewis, I was just going to point out that a number of the stories that we've seen on social media and everything else that our people put out, when they interview certain drivers, some of them are very attached to their route and the customers in particular, and they develop relationships. So to Ms. Johnson's point that, there are both types of situations, I think. Do you have another comment, Director Lewis?
Yes, I just want to say that, there might be some outliers there like that, but the numbers speak for themselves. 51%. So it's definitely, I'm hoping we have a strategy as we go into those discussions later in the year, and hopefully we can sit down and come up with some kind of solution on that. The last comment, and I just wanted to ask staff, if you had to give me one feedback, one thing that stuck out from the survey, what would that be? This is for Charlene, Deborah, and John.
If I may, Committee Chair Catlin, I would say, as indicated, we're on the precipice of change. Employees that comprise this agency feel as if they can voice their concerns without fear of retaliation or any trepidation or angst. And I believe that's critically important to any organization. Thank you.
Mr. McKay, do you want to add anything to those takeaways?
My the biggest eye opener for me was that dip in the 3 to 5 year camp. This was a consistent. Let me go find what I'm talking about here. So this dip right here. So it goes from very high for very new employees, and then sort of consistent across the 1 to 3, and then 5 to 10 or more year bands. This 3 to 5 year group right here. I don't know that I have the data to support this, but I feel that there is some lingering effects of COVID work time. That was something that I think we could look a little bit further into. I don't know what that means or how we can help improve engagement within that group, but just more efforts focused on those folks.
Well, we may see next year how that shifts a little bit. Director Busick, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just felt I should clarify my position on the Net Promoter Score in light of Director Tisdale's accusation that I'm jumping on a bandwagon with regard to that. We adopted that a few years ago when we hired TransPro as a consultant to talk about evaluating the agency and the general manager. But in practice over the years, I have come to believe that it doesn't accurately reflect performance. And Director Davidson alluded to this as well. When you have to have a score of 9 or 10 to become a promoter, it's hard to determine whether scores going up or down have to do with having fewer promoters or more neutrals or detractors. So that's why I think it becomes problematic. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Busick. Director Geisinger, please.
Just quickly, my problem with the Net Promoter Score was exactly what Ms. Pelleggi pointed out, which is, I sometimes think an 8's a nice score, that's pretty good. So I like the idea of keeping it. I think it gives us some consistency, and it is another measure. I also think that I had not thought of Ms. Pelleggi's point, but letting people know what those scores mean could be really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. I share that, the education piece, and having just completed yesterday after reviewing this particular survey, which, by the way, I find to be very encouraging. I'm really, really pleased with the results. But I had to fill out several questionnaires or surveys regarding my recent hospital stay. That definitely clouds a person's perspective. And I recognized by the survey instrument that they were using that they were trying to gauge Net Promoter Score. And I think just having been through this, I changed my scores based on my understanding of what a Net Promoter Score is. And so I think the education piece is very important. I just had to opine on that because I would have rated what would have been categorized as a detractor as opposed to even a neutral or a promoter had I not had that basis of knowledge. Anyway, sorry for the opinion. I don't see any other directors that have questions or comments. This was really, in my view, a really great presentation and a very encouraging one. And this was, whoops, I apologize. This was one of the first of what I consider the deep dives that this committee wants to embark upon. And so I would encourage you as committee members, as well as other directors on the board, to provide feedback to us on other areas where we might take a deeper dive. And I think we're going to be looking at that in September. And I can look to Mr. Kroll to clarify that. But one of the areas that had come through on the Operations, Safety and Security Committee was perhaps a deeper dive into some of the data around our security piece. And I asked Chief Fitzgerald if he might be willing to come to this committee with some of those data. And any others that you all would think of, I would appreciate that we get those in the queue. Are there any other matters to come before the committee? Yes, Director Guzman, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A friendly reminder, at the end of this week, I will be out of state for classes. So the next meeting I believe we have scheduled is July 10th. I will not be here. I say that for the purpose of quorum. I will clearly read my packet and correspond with you, Madam Chair, if that's okay. Any concerns or questions that I won't be able to address because I will be absent from the meeting. But I just wanted to give that heads up.
Thank you for that heads up, and please feel free to communicate in advance. The other thing that we have to be aware of is, excuse me a second, I just dropped a bunch of papers and it'll take a minute to get it. I'm going to yield the floor to Director or to Jack Kroll for a moment, if you don't mind.
Sure, I happy to chime in here. The actual next meeting that we have on the books for the Performance Committee is Monday, July 22nd. That's a little bit different time. It's going to be at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. That meeting is really focused on getting the ball moving on the 360 evaluation and checking in on the GM and CEO's performance assessment timeframe. So that's the purpose of that meeting. It was mentioned earlier as well about doing another deep dive. I think that it would be good to have a plan for when those might come forward and what topics. The next big survey results, and John, correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe are coming in September for the customer value and or customer excellence and community value survey results. So that's on your plate for September. Typically, you all wouldn't meet in August, but we did poll for some availability in August. However, again, the primary purpose of that August meeting, again, is going to be to make progress on developing the 360 assessment tool.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I was going to mention that we still have that process to work through, and that's that might involve some directors participating in that activity. So you already mentioned the next meeting, which is the regular meeting is July 22nd. Are there any other matters to come before this committee? Seeing none, and with no further discussion or agenda items, this meeting is adjourned as of 9:52 a.m. Thank you all, and thank you for a really good discussion about what I see as a positive survey.